All right. So, two guys are in a bar in Anchorage. And one says, "There is no God, and I can prove it." And the other one says, "Really? Well, do tell." He says, "I was on an expedition out on the tundra and got separated from the rest of my party during a freak blizzard. I fell down in the ice, broke my leg. I'm lying in the snow and ice with a broken leg, all alone. I knew I would die if a miracle didn't happen, and soon. So I prayed for one. I even, clasped my hands and I said, 'Oh God, if you're there, save me.' And nothing happened. So then I kind of worked up, I got louder. Maybe God didn't hear me, and I shouted, 'Oh God, if you're there, help me.' And then I thought, well, maybe God only hears me if I cry. So I worked up a few tears, and they were sincere because I'm in danger. 'God, if you're here, help me.' And no miracle happened. And the person who was drinking with him said, 'But you must have been saved or you wouldn't be here to tell me about it.' He said, 'Nah. Some guy on a dog sled came over the ridge and found me on the ice and brought me home.'" So today I'm going to talk about dog sled teams, the guy on the dog sled, or what I like to call God with skin on. And I had a completely different sermon prepared for today, but a few weeks ago I had the blessing of sharing with some of our wonderful befrienders, and one of them said, "You have to do a sermon on this." So I said, okay. So that's what I'm offering today. And I'll start with a couple of selections from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. "Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. In fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye can't say to the hand, 'I don't need you.' And the head cannot say to the feet, 'I don't need you.' On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. And if one part is honored, every part rejoices with it." So as I said, today I want to talk about God with skin on and how we are called to live that out with one another. And to do that, I want to tell you a story about what I have come to call my 8-year bad day. And I've talked before about this period of my life, and at that time I gave a sermon on, having God speak directly to me. But also during this period of time, I learned about the value of receiving help from God with skin on. So my 8-year bad day started when I had just finally, oh thank God, finished my PhD. I had my first big university job. My first husband and I were trying to start a family. Everything was looking bright. And he was diagnosed with cancer. And over the next 8 years, he was very sick. He went through cancer treatment 3 different times and finally died. And then my friend immediately after was diagnosed and also died. And I was 30, my late 30s when this started, and in my 40s when it ended. And I reference this period of my life because it was during this time that I encountered God, and I became Christian, and I was baptized. And perhaps most importantly, I learned to let go of the illusion of self-sufficiency. The illusion of self-sufficiency. This myth that we are or should be self-sufficient runs rampant in the United States, and we all suffer from it. It informs our policies, it informs our treatment of each other, it informs our loneliness, actually, as people in a society. And I could give a whole other sermon on that, but I'm not going to. But as is the case for many of us, I finally, in that period of time, learned to let go of my ego and allowed God in various forms because I was suffering and because I was deeply in over my head, and I had to let go, get out of my own way, and ask for help. So my teacher about God with skin on was an oncology social worker. I hated her. Let me just say, often we don't like our best teachers, right? So my husband Greg had completed this really grueling year of chemotherapy, and we believed he was in the clear, and we had moved from Boston down to Connecticut, and I had started this new job, and our lives were starting to re-begin. And instead, what happened was his cancer came raging back. And this time he required a bone marrow transplant. And if you're not familiar with it, this is one of the most, it is a very effective treatment for a lot of people. It's also one of the most devastating treatments that anyone can go through. The person going through it becomes incredibly ill, has no immune system, can't be left alone for more than 20 minutes in case they get an infection, spike a fever, and die. For the family members, it means learning to run IV lines at home, preparing a special diet, managing up to 25 different meds a day, and above all, constant vigilance. And so in order to enter into this potentially life-saving program, we had to undergo an evaluation by the oncologist, by other doctors, and then by this social worker. And she had to sign off on our ability to do this. And I'll never forget her looking at me, and she said, "Cameron, I see that you have done everything you could do to take care of your husband through his first year of chemotherapy. And you've done it mostly on your own, and you've done a really good job." And then she said, "But now you're in a marathon, not a sprint. And you are burnt toast." And this is when I first started not liking her. Because I thought I looked pretty put together, And she said, "Besides which, you have to work full time to put a roof over your heads, food on the table, and health insurance, right? So how are you going to do all this while working full time?" I was like, "Well, I can. I can do it. I'm special." So she handed me this book, and I'm going to have it available on the table outside. But it's a book about putting together a care network for someone who's ill, or recovering from surgery, or coming to the end of their life, or whatever. And she said to me, "When you can tell me that you have a network of people to drive him 90 minutes back and forth from, your home to this cancer center, sit with him while you're at work, help manage his medications and all of that. When you've got a network of those people, I will sign off." I was furious. We had lived in this community for 6 months when this happened. We barely knew anyone. Our families were far away. And I was like, "You mean, he's going to be denied a life-saving treatment because we don't have enough friends?" It just felt like this horrible form of discrimination. But she was unmoved. She was just like, "You're not going to make it. You have to do this." So when I went to work, every time I saw someone who said, "Gee, I'm sorry to hear Greg's cancer came back," and you know how we do, we sort of wave in the general direction of helpfulness, we're sort of like, "And, let me know if there's anything we can do." And I'd pull out my little clipboard, and I'd be like, "We're having an organizational meeting on Friday, and I've got this book, and I hope you'll come." And so we did that, and we had our first meeting, and 30 people showed up. 30 gods with skin on. people from, colleagues from my job who I barely knew. And of course, my pride is really on the line here because, these are people who are going to decide if I get tenure or not and all this other stuff. I don't know them, but I'm just like, okay, we have to do this. Some of my graduate students, I was in AA, people from my AA community came. And, the truth is, we all can be incredibly generous given the chance. And so at our first meeting, we followed these really important guidelines that are outlined in this book, Share the Care. And a couple that still stand out to me today, the first one was everybody had to go around the room and say a selfish reason why they were coming, why they were joining the group. It couldn't be like, oh, I'm just a caring person and I have a halo and look how good I am, Because how would that make Greg, the patient in this situation, feel, right? And people said really powerful things like, I'm lonely. I want to find a community. Or, I'm really afraid of dying. And, I don't know if Greg's going to die, but I feel like I can overcome my fear by walking this journey with you guys. Or there were a couple people in my AA group who said, when I was drinking and using and my mom was dying or my grandfather was dying, I was not helpful to my family. My behavior was a distraction. And so I want to make amends for that now. And that was really important, And the other real main principle was that everybody only did what they were comfortable doing. And nobody would get burned out. Nobody was called on to be a hero, right? And I remember after everybody had gone around and we had this meeting and Greg's sitting there and he's already on quite a few painkillers at this point. And he just raised his hand and he said, can I just add something? And we're all like, oh yeah, we're here to help, right? He says, I just want you all to know that nobody except Cameron is going to wipe my butt. And, it is important, right, to take people's needs into account when we're helping them. And I think that was an important point. He had some priorities. So, one thing we can think about with this is, where is God asking me to be God's hands and feet and eyes and ears in the service of someone else? And actually, most of us in this room do that. We are already super willing to be that dog sled team that comes over the horizon if we're asked. But I would suggest that that's the easy part. The real hurdle is allowing ourselves to receive. First of all, to notice that we need help, and then second, to be willing to receive it, however God sends it, right? Because it might come in a package that we don't expect. And I think that a lot of people, if we let our pride and ego get in our way, we deny our need for help, it gets in the way of our willingness to ask for help, and it gets in the way of our willingness to receive it. Because it's scary to be vulnerable. I had a professor once who was a survivor of polio, and he was only able to move about with a complex set of braces. And because of that, he was very active in the drafting and passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And he used to say to us in class a lot, he would say, we are all temporarily able. Think about that, right? It's true. We all have sort of a natural fear of death, but I don't think that's anything compared to our fear of disability and vulnerability. But we are all temporarily abled, and I would suggest this isn't just physical. It's mental, it's emotional, it's spiritual. Depending on the day, we all need help. So anyway, there we were, and over the next several years, this amazing group of people did all these things. They gave him rides to and from this cancer center that was an hour and a half away. One hilarious story, one of the guys who was a colleague of mine went to pick Greg up after his first big nuke of really heavy-duty chemotherapy, and they couldn't find each other. And this is when cell phones were like really, really new, and they're calling me from different payphones at the hospital. I can't find him. They'd met, they knew each other. Greg had lost his hair over the weekend, and Ken was sitting right behind him and just didn't recognize him. And then they spent the whole time but there were these moments like this. They gave rides, they sat in with Greg on doctor visits when I could not, they prepared meals, they did all kinds of things. They helped us move to different living situations based on his medical needs. And most importantly, they loved us. And they gave us hope that even in the darkness of loss, God loved us. And as it turned out, no one but me needed to wipe his butt, which was very good, right? And here are two things that I learned. Number one, that allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and receive help is holy work. We are made fragile so that we will need God and need each other. Jesus not only washed the feet of his disciples, but he allowed them to wash his feet. And he encouraged us to wash each other's feet. And I know Brian tried to get a Maundy Thursday going here, and y'all don't want your feet washed. It's hard. It's a vulnerable moment. We don't my feet, I have to go get a pedicure. Who will see my feet? It is a moment of saying to God, yes, I am willing to accept help. I am willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to be naked, right? And that is one of the suggestions or commands that Jesus gave us that a lot of us really don't follow. And the second thing I learned is that God sends us the people we need, not necessarily the people we thought were going to show up. The dog sled team takes many forms. I had definite ideas of who in my family, who in my husband's family, who in our group of friends would help. And I was wrong on all counts. Not because they were bad people, because of circumstances, because of their own overwhelm of what was going on. And if I had limited my willingness to receive help to those people, we would have really, really suffered. I'll give you an example. Bone marrow transplantation works really well for a lot of people. It didn't for Greg. And so the third time his cancer came back, I took a leave from my work. I got a fellowship up in Boston, and we moved back to Boston so he could be close to the most cutting-edge clinical trials. And the weekend we were moving, for whatever reason, the 30 people who had helped us all this time, they all were busy. Nobody could help us move. So we just sort of said, okay, we'll do it. We'll decide. We loaded our Ryder truck ourselves. And I have to say, I'm terrible at spatial reasoning. I just that whole thing of you put the heavy stuff on the bottom and stuff. I didn't get that. And he was still quite sick and on a lot of medication. So we loaded it up, and I swear to God, we didn't even need to drive for that thing to tip over. It would have tipped over just sitting there in the parking, lot. It was just not well loaded. And Greg was exhausted, so he went inside to take a nap, and I sat on our front stoop and I just cried. I was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And honest to God, around the corner comes a van with full of 16 and 17-year-old boys. Hardy, strapping boys. And they all get out. And the man who is driving, he's in his 30s, he comes up to me and he's like, hi, are you Cameron? I said, yes. He says, yeah, I'm the coach. This is the such and such high school soccer team, and on Sundays I like my boys to do a good deed for someone in the community, and I heard that you needed help. So we're here to help you. They took one look at that Ryder truck that was listing a little bit, to the right, and they just unloaded the whole thing, reloaded it, said, have a lovely day, and disappeared. I don't even remember what high school it was. But the truth is, had we not been willing to let our community know that we needed help, that dog sled team would not have showed up. And it was a lifesaver. So, in closing, what I'd like to ask you to consider, are there parts in your life where you need God with skin on to show up? Is it a physical need? Is it a need for just, I'm getting older? Is it a need for help around the house? Is it an emotional one? Do you need to just have a coffee with somebody and talk to them and have them listen to your story? As Martha and the kids pointed out, it is a gift that we can give to allow someone else to be useful to us. We all feel good when we can be useful. So if you have one of those needs, what's keeping you from asking? What's keeping you from seeing where the God with skin on is showing up or offering to show up in your life? And in closing, what I would like to read is this wonderful quote I just found from M. Scott Peck. He says, "There can be no vulnerability without risk. There can be no community without vulnerability. There can be no peace and ultimately no life without community." Amen.